So my name is Sergey Kolesnikov. I am the Deputy Director of Center for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance in the Department of Land Economy here in the University of Cambridge. We are very happy to host this series, 50th anniversary of the Limits to Growth Seminar Series, jointly with the University of Cambridge Conservation Research Institute, which hosted here in this wonderful David Attenborough building, and with our partners in the Institute for Public Policy, Global Sustainability Institute under Ruskin University, and of course the Club of Rome, which is behind the whole idea of the Limits to Growth movement series. And today, today our speaker is the convener of the whole series, Dr. Roberto Pasqualino. I will introduce him very shortly. But what I wanted also to say is that our last seminar in the series will be given by Professor Jayati Ghosh, and it will take place 1 week later. So originally it was scheduled for the next Monday, the 12th of December. Now it will take place on the 19th of December, but it will also happen here in this very place at the very same time. So Roberto is a research associate in the Department of Land Economy and fellow at C-EENRG, Cambridge Center for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance here. He works on science policy interface to support system transformation towards a more just and sustainable society. Roberto's interdisciplinary background combines extensive training in complexity science, finance, mathematics, computer science, dynamic system modeling, economics, and public policy. At C-EENRG, he works with us on the large-scale BEIS and CIFF-funded Economics of Energy Innovation and System Transitions project. Roberto is a complexity economist and industrial engineer by training, with degrees from Anglia Ruskin University, the University of Bergen, the University of Cranfield, and University of Genova. And Roberto has developed a family of system dynamics models that are freely available online, and Roberto will present the results of his work on these models today. And he also has an extensive industry experience, working in both large corporations and small and medium enterprises. And he's the lead author of the book, Resources, Financial Risks, and the Dynamics of Growth, and the co-author of the book, Corporate Sustainability and Practice. With all this rich background, today we're going back into the depths of, I guess, modeling that informed and continues to inform the discussion around limits to growth. And for this discussion, I very much welcome Roberto.
Thank you very much, Sergey. So as I always put it forward, that was the theme of the Limits to Growth. People, I think, recognize them. Donella Meadows, Dennis Meadows, Jörg Runner's were the core team. Jörgen came also for us to give a talk. So just to give a bit of terminology, as today's presentation will be a bit about modeling. Just want to make sure people are clear the basic terminology about system dynamics. So we have stocks, which are the boxes. They accumulate what comes in with the flows. So the flows change the stocks, and the stocks accumulate something, which feedback can start generating some sort of influence on the other stocks. Okay, so when we look at system dynamics, we look at complexity, and we look at feedback loops. And the feedback loops can be either the balancing one, which means that if you increase something, you get a feedback which stops you having the sort of dynamic. And you have a reinforcing one, which basically increases the effect of an increase or a decrease in one particular element. Okay. So when we go back to the entire concept of the limits to growth, that's very, very simple. In the sense that all they said at the time was there is a stock or a number of stocks which are built up by reinforcing dynamics, and these are the population and capital, so they call that thing growth. And there are going to be also some sort of other stocks, which we call limits. And basically, the entire point of limits to growth was nothing more than trying to recognize that limits are there and make sure everybody knew about them. And the most important concept is that limits at some point can feed back to the reinforcing loop until the point they stop the reinforcing growth mechanism to operate. That's the thesis. They got a lot of criticism over the time. And their point was mainly about recognizing these limits. So we can agree with that, we cannot agree with that if you don't like it. The main thing is, if you agree, you start considering this feedback, and that's what the economy is basically trying, how we try to basically expand the normal economic model that was always driven by just this sort of dynamic, forgetting about anything that was about it. So just looking at the reinforcing loops, this one is population. So population grows because of birds. The more the population, the more the birds. This one is the forecast provided by the United Nations a few years ago. If you have the reinforcing dynamic, is the reds. If you have, I don't know, a low case scenario, is the green. The UN expects this sort of levelized population growth, so it's not going to be fully exponential, apparently. When we look at the second reinforcing loop, which is basically economic growth, this one is the world's real GDP growth rates taken from 1960 until, I took this number a few days ago in the World Bank. So if you take an average of that, you can see a bit of a trend maybe. But if you just take the average, it's about 3.47% growth rate for the entire planet on average using World Bank data. Again, a big approximation. However, when you compare that to the real GDP, and you make sure that that's 0.347 sums up into an exponential growth rate. So you understand that the exponential growth at the 3.43% end up doubling the economy about every 20 years. So that's actually what's happening. As you can see, that's compared pretty well with the data. And that's actually what's happening, right? So the main problem, of course, was the following for them. So there was like, let's recognize that the exponential growth will create problems. They were not really just a matter of growth, it was the fact that it was exponential growth creating problems. So again, what we normally do is to do this simple exercise, very basic about the exponential growth, take a piece of paper, how thick it is, the answer, you can think about that by 0.1 millimeters, so 1/10 of a millimeter. You fold it once, you fold it twice, it becomes 0.4 millimeters. And then you are asked to fold it another 40 times and to give an intuitive answer. And most often people will start thinking about that, and many of them will tell you, okay, it is 1 meter, or no, it's too much, maybe 5 meters, 10 meters. But actually, when you get to the answer, basically that's the answer. So if you start doubling, you end up that you pass 1 meter at about 14 times, you go beyond 100 in 20. In 24, you pass 1 kilometer, in 34, you get more than 1,700 kilometers. And when you fold it 42 times in itself, it's about 439,000 kilometers. That's a piece of paper, 42 times on itself. Of course, to them, it was the problem. I mean, it's like, how can we double up in the next 20 years? So imagine that is the distance between the Earth and the Moon, actually a bit more than that. And if you look at population growth of the time, that was happening. I mean, this one is population for the last 10,000 years. Definitely is worrying. Okay, so that was their point. They were like, if we have exponential growth and that thing will somehow increase some sort of pollution emissions that will accumulate, that will, of course, there's a natural absorption rate which is constant. The Earth cannot absorb forever whatever we put in there. If that thing is constant, whatever we add is going to accumulate, and if that goes exponentially, how do we handle it? So the question becomes, if the limits are there, it will feed back negatively on the economy, we have a big problem. If we don't, maybe that's fine, we can keep doing things as we did. Okay, but the question is, I mean, the environmental problems are coming, climate change is coming, and pollution can impact back the economy and things like that. So that's the entire problem of limits to growth. Again, to introduce myself very quickly, this is part of a book that I wrote in 2020, Resources, Financial Risk, and Dynamics of Growth. So the content of this book is basically a little bit of the introduction I gave to every single of the seminar until now, and what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks as well. So in this book, I built up a model on the World3, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And basically the main conclusion out of this is the government should do something. So because we might end up in very hard time unless we find a way to deal with growth in a good way. So the content of the rest of the presentation is a bit of the background of the study. I'm going to talk about the models that informed mine, and then a bit of simulation and looking at a bit of long-term scenarios with that, and then the take-home messages. So I presented this slide in the past already. This one is basically the beginning of my PhD. I arrived in Cambridge and I was put forward with these two, and it was 2012. And on one hand, I had this person, Graham Turner, professor from Australia, comparing the scenarios of World3 with the data. He did that by normalizing the scale of the data and the run of the scenario. So he didn't put the numbers in the model, and he ended up in the conclusion that the BEIS run scenario collapse in 2020 was the right scenario. It basically became, again, quite widely known around the world in newspaper and so on. On the other hand, I had the planetary boundaries report. Again, a number of pressure war paths, and that could create a lot of problems for the economy. Okay. In the meantime, what I ended up finding is that we were in the middle of a price increase of a number of resources. So we had oil price increase, coal, natural gas was so it's not as much as now, but we had this sort of high price, which were bringing up as well the price of fertilizers, the price of foods, rice, and that was the connection I was trying to build up upon with my research. So the first thing I was doing was like, let's see what happens if I put the World3 model and put the numbers in it. And what I did was simply to take the number until 2012 of a number of variables, where the parameter was basically calibrates the model. And then rather than doing what people like Gaia did, or that is trying to see the trends and trying to put them in the same scale, was like, let's put the number, let's see if the model will collapse if you put the right number inside. So it was a slightly different approach and much more, let's say, inside of the model. So the result were the following. That's when you look at population, let's say they managed to catch it quite well. So you see the dots are the historical data. The red is the scenario that collapses in 2020 or a bit later. And the black line is my calibration. So basically, in the last model they proposed, it was 2003. So the second updates on the 1972 book, they kind of capture pretty well the data on population. However, when we go deep down, you find that the birth rate was a bit off. So they was expecting that to be, let's say, below what actually was. And they also was a bit off on life expectancy. So they were expecting a much higher life expectancy. However, these two problems, let's say, balance each other, generating still the same population growth. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense to people. But in practice, that wasn't really a big problem for them, because the main issue was population growth is the key variable which will collapse the world. So it didn't really matter to them if it was one flow or the other decreasing the dynamics of population. We went to the harvested arable land. Again, it was pretty off. So one of the main variables collapsing the world economy because they don't have enough food for production, for feeding people. That was quite off in real world. We have much more arable land already in use. So the basic scenario that limits the growth was imprecise. And the most interesting part was that the historical data demonstrated that the industrial outputs and the service output were very different. In practice, the economy developed very differently from what they were expecting over time. So to them, in 1970, they were expecting nuclear to take charge of everything. Manufacturing, everything was industrial, everybody consuming a lot of things that were creating pollution. The real world ended up developing more finance, developing more digitalization of things. So in 1970, they didn't even have internet. It came up in 1990s. Okay, I mean, there were a lot of things changing. They couldn't expect that. It's completely fine. But the interesting thing is simply that we have an economy driven by services, not by industry, which basically doesn't say that the world will not collapse, because the world will make the system to collapse at some point. But in practice will not collapse definitely for the scenarios 2 or 3 they were putting together. Okay. So what I did was World3. I mean, one of those trying to learn from it, trying to take what was important. So that's the basic structure of the limits of growth model. The way they build that, industries is at the core of everything. If industry collapses, everything collapses on top of that. So the material growth is the core of the system. And in my view, that thing was supposed to be updated. There was need to include the financial sector, price mechanisms, a sort of behavior of the industries to try to save themselves rather than trying to collapse as soon as possible. So all I did from this model was to take, so I even removed pollution. I didn't expect that to become the element of collapse by the year 2030, 40. So I just took from this model the land sector. I thought the structure of land is basically good to me. The land produces food and you can add fertilizer on it. That's what I took. And then I went to look in the literature review. You know, there are many other models. So the funny thing is that after 1972, the researcher leading that started building new models. One of them is J. Forrester, the creator of system dynamics. He passed away in 2016. And he started taking effort to build a system dynamics national model, because limits of growth was criticized for not including anything about the economy inside of the limits of growth. And they actually started building on top of that. So in PhD thesis, you know, Peter Sergey, for example, worked on that. He is a very well-known person in system thinking. John Sterman is today one of the main professors in system dynamics from the MIT. So they all work on that, and they build up this model. So all I did was to take charge of that type of work, and I will use that as well. So what's the problem? The thesis of John Sterman was available online, so I just took it and tried to merge that together with the limits of growth model, where I took the land sector. And what happened? I just took the number of sector that's a fully supply chain with a bit of finance inside and a number of things. So a much more complicated model than the limits of growth in terms of number of equation. And I start basically connecting things and build up on top of, let's say, the state of the art as well. So I start adding new things. So the new structure of the model is the one you see on the very left. So it's a technical network. You have the food, you have the energy separated between fossil fuels and renewables. I did a model thing like minerals, because they were not expected to be the main constraint, but they can be added as well. So they will, let's say, produce energy for feeding the entire economy. And also the agricultural sector produce biofuels. The manufacturing sector produce the capital necessary to all the others to operate. The households will take savings and get wages and dividends and then pay back. So there's a closed system economy. I include the sector that is the climate, so now it's climate sector rather than pollution. And then you get things like bank and government, which basically close the economy in full. So you have the taxes coming, the government and spending coming through the economy. In the bank, you have things like the money supply, or they generate money out of the demand of money. So they basically they create money as well out of nothing, out of the way that the economy actually works today. So they were the two models, and this model was built up at Anglia Ruskin University at the Global Sustainability Institute with the professor Ale Jones, who was my supervisor and director of the Global Sustainability Institute, as well as part of the Center for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, which is a project where I built my postdoc, and it was actually regionalizing these things. So now I have actually also a regionalized version of this model that I'm going to show, but today is just the global one. So one of the main factors of this model was that we put that in a stock and flow consistent fashion. So every sector has the financial variable build up on top of every real variable. So you have the assets, but you also have the value of these assets. You have the cash coming in, and you have a sort of accumulation of that cash, so they can use saving and you reuse the spending for other things. But they also have both the assets and the liabilities. So they build up the system on debts, which is actually the key variable that in practice matters in a capitalistic economy, because that's where everything starts, from debt. And then there is equity. Each sector has this factor, so in practice you can create a matrix and connect all of the variables and all of the sectors among each other. This one again is a bit complicated, and just to give you an idea, is how the cascade from financial real asset shock can generate a cascade to the financial aspect. So the way it simply works is that when you stop production for whatever reason, so you stop food production, you stop energy, they drop a bit of oil, that will stop an inventory, and the inventory will generate some sort of feedback to price. That price will generate some sort of revenue to the company, which will determine how they can hire people, labor, and capital, and make new debt as well. That will impact liquidity. Liquidity also, the less the liquidity, the more the defaults, the more the interest rates. So that's a risk factor into every single sector. And that entire thing is connected into the way basically in which the systems operate. And again, the price became one of the key variables there, and that was one of the core of the model it was trying to build upon. This one is a calibration. So again, the model calibrates well on about 32 variables, global variables. It captures well real GDP. The inflation as well is one important variable, because out of prices, there is a attempt to build up an inflation out of all of them as an average between them, and feeding back into interest rate and investment. So closing exactly everything in the economy. So we connect that with the government tax revenue. We generate a government debt as well. And that's, for example, how it captures the price of fossil fuels all the time. So we've stopped that in about 2020. So again, the model doesn't capture things like the financial crisis. That was not designed to do that. We basically wanted to look at the limits of physical assets. So it doesn't capture this sort of spike in 2008, but it basically captures a bit what happened afterwards. So we did some long-term scenarios. The way I did the long-term scenarios was to build one upon the other. So this one was the climate factor, trying to model a number of tipping points. And the idea here is that one hot topic to me was the hothouse effect. So the idea is that if you emit CO2, that will generate some increase in temperature, but that will increase in temperature will also start impacting back the way the ecosystem will react. So maybe you end up having glaciers melting faster and faster and faster. That will start generating more carbon emission in the atmosphere, generating a sort of reinforcing loop. So I was basically testing that in different ways. And the funny thing is also that when you generate a sort of negative effect of that temperature rising to some sort of climates, negative effect on agriculture, the way the agriculture works is that, of course, they will try to adapt to that. And the more the negative impact, the more they will produce, generating more CO2 emission. That is also another reinforcing loop. That's, I think, quite interesting to find. So what we did was to start without any climate. We had the climate effect, we increased that, and then we went into the energy crisis type of scenario. The energy crisis was nothing more than trying to understand what happened if the resources, for whatever reason, finish between now and 2070 or 2100. And it was testing a number of scenarios simply to understand what happened, how the model reacts if there is an energy crisis and all of a sudden we don't have enough energy. On the back of everything, there was the green sector as well, growing at the average rate, which we put at 3%. So it was an exponential growth rate of the green sector, producing more and more energy as well. But still, 3% is not enough. And of course, if you decrease the fossil fuel availability to the point in which 3% is not enough, you get some sort of energy crisis type of behavior. So that's, for example, what happened. So this one is a number of scenarios. The worst case here is simply a big energy crisis happening and generating some sort of collapse of the economy, taken back forward out of the green energy growing later. That's also quite interesting to see how the inflation works out. In the case in which you end up having an energy crisis, again, you end up having inflation rising, reaching a point of a tipping point and then collapsing simply because the financial sector decreases well interest rate and making sure that the economy starts building up again. So when the price decreases, they have to find a way to make the economy to grow again using interest rate. That was the time taken for that. That actually allows the economy to grow again. So here you also have as you can see, the variables generating collapse are the fossil fuel shipments and the renewable production, which was, again, in the worst scenario, the green sector doesn't take up the weight of the economy, and in the good scenario, because there is enough energy, they manage. And that basically, in fact, brings a sensitivity between energy crisis against a scenario in which everything works because there is enough energy for everybody. A funny thing here as well is the following: that the price goes up in the worst case scenario, going down again after you get this sort of green tech transition, and again that's the same for the renewable price. In this case, it's simply the way in which the capitalist economy would work. So the price increases, they find a way to invest in it, they have more money, and they generate more opportunities for the green sector to grow until the point in which the economy takes over again because we have enough energy. So out of that scenario, we end up building scenarios. One was trying to see what happened on top of one of these, let's say, crisis scenarios. If I add a carbon tax, or what happened if I have more or less green energy technology. So the first one is green growth economy, let's say, and the point there is testing on top of the previous scenario, which was already a crisis, trying to see what happens if the green technology goes even less well than the previous, or to the point in which green tech goes very, very, very well. Okay, so as you can see, the dashed line scenario is the same as before, and this one collapsing is basically a scenario where the green tech goes very badly. Okay, it goes a 1% growth rate per year. So that again generates this sort of economic crisis collapse in the sense that green tech doesn't take forward. That can happen for a number of reasons. Minerals is not enough. I don't know, maybe the countries in the world don't take it forward. I don't know, can be anything. And the result of the model is simply that in the case of a big collapse, again, we take it forward the previous scenario, so GDP growth, GDP deflator will go up and then start collapsing. And then again, the price goes down because simply there is no demand to take the economy up again. The interest rate also follows a bit the inflation, so it increases a lot when price increases, but then collapses to assure that the economy can take it forward again and stabilize at a certain point, and then fossil fuel shipment again collapse abruptly in different type of scenarios. Again, that are again the same of that we test in this particular scenario. Again, a good thing is that it demonstrates that because you have increasing prices in a fossil fuel sector that is technically collapsing, the first thing that you do is to hire a lot of people, and you increase employment in a collapsing economy on fossil fuels into the fossil industry. And then you will definitely collapse, generating more and more employment for the renewable sector. Then the next one is applying a carbon tax. So this one is also quite interesting in the sense that I was trying to test what happened in the very same scenario of the previous one. If you apply a carbon tax very heavy in 2020 and 2030, and the carbon tax weight was 250% of the price of the fossil fuel energy, And the funny thing is that if you apply that in 2020, you get less performance, a lower performance than applying 2030 in terms of economic output. The reason why is because if you apply in 2020, you create such a shock in the economy that impact the way the economy works. They will have not enough energy. The price will be so high that will stop the operation of the normal economy. A bit of a crisis basically in the 2020. But still, both of them didn't manage to solve the temperature anomaly problem that was put at the very front of the analysis. And then the very last, I put basically the two together, carbon tax in 2020 plus very good green growth, and that basically solves the problem. Which basically end up saying if you have a very high chance of developing green growth, that's amazing, but the scenario here was basically quite unrealistic, was like 9% growth per year, and the carbon tax in 2020 was also unrealistic because it didn't really work. That would save the world based on these scenarios, and of course the result become that's not really possible to save the world that particular way. That's not going to work. So in the case we have a hothouse effect that is very bad because of course the scenario at the very beginning was extreme. So it might not happen ever that the hothouse will be so bad for the economy to generate that sort of impact. But in practice, the real outcome was simply the government should really be welcome to operate or to act in the market. So not just a free market economy can save the way the system works, and that social change before technology can potentially support that. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
There's a lot of time left for the Q&A session. Are there any questions in the audience? You're welcome to start the question.
Hi, so I'm John. I'm a PhD student from university in applied maths, and I was interested in how realistic you thought all the different variables were. I didn't really have a good context. So, for example, in the green tech update, you said that 9% was crazy. What is the realistic, or what would you estimate as a more realistic value? Because to me, like a lot of the renewables uptake you had in your graphs was, I guess, quite slow. I guess I'm more used to the UK uptake, which is obviously ahead of the rest of the world. So is 3% really low? Is that what we're expecting for the rest of the world?
So again, the data that were put in the model were the data from 2020, and it was trying to put a global average. Again, so 3% was about right. I think you can increase that a little, but the main point of the scenarios were like, let's try to see how much I need to save the world based on the initial hypothesis. And that's brought back to a 9% growth rate. That was, again, that was let's say, a way to run a scenario, which is something I criticize myself in the sense that there is something you can always improve. And the structure of green tech growth was put exogenously in the model. So it didn't have, a sort of way to feedback or adapt the growth of that particular part of the economy. And that was generating mostly an ability of the same capital, of the same assets into the green sector to generate more energy in the same amount of capital. So the 9% was the productivity growth of that particular sector for the same unit of capital. So of course, the more you increase that number, the more there's energy that you can use for feeding the demands, and the less is going to be the price, because the system works based on a almost standard way of seeing the price change between supply and demand, together with a sort of evolutionary approach in which the buyers tend to adapt to a new normal. And because of that, they will ask for more money, and because of that, they will ask for basically we'll have more capability to buy more things, and that will generate the inflation as well in the market. So the 3% growth rates, again, the numbers included in the model are relatively extremes. So they were just to demonstrate that the model can capture a number of possibilities. And ideally, if one would have the right number, would potentially generate a way better scenario or a more realistic scenario. But the most important thing is that the sensitivity demonstrates what might happen if things turn to be wrong. So it's just a way to say, grow that much, so don't do less than that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thank you.
Continuing on this topic, there is actually several questions in the chat which ask a very real question. So what are the realistic social changes we must prepare for and participate in? That's a question from MJ Kaya and also from Claudia.
Thank you very much. I mean, the realistic change, that's as usual a very broad topic. You can take it from so many different ways. So again, at the very base, you have the consumption behavior that, of course, if you try to destroy the environment a little bit less, that's of course a benefit. So again, the very basic can be to try to control a little bit the consumption patterns. Try to behave a little bit more without the need of buying 3 cars or 5 houses, or having a airplane to travel around the world. If you can substitute that with a Zoom call rather than traveling to a place, maybe you generate similar impacts, but without having that sort of negative consequences for the environment. So the social change at the very basic is trying to limit the demand for people. A big constraint there comes from the fact that the government will unlikely try to take a policy which will not be accepted by people. So again, if everybody consumes a lot and the government says all of a sudden, no, you have to consume half of it, you get arrived. So the government doesn't want that. So clearly you have a feedback loop there. We have an element where if you change the demands, you probably change the system at the very top. Then, basic things are like meat consumption in the food industry. You know that the more the meat you eat, the more you have an impact. You don't have to stop everything. You just eat a little bit less, you have a bit less of impact. So it's not like advocating for vegan that will make a difference. But again, if one knows what are the factors, can try to control them and try maybe to have less negative impact. Does it make sense?
It does, sorry, but shouldn't be, I mean, I completely agree with you. Sorry to jump in, because it's related, but don't you think that the only way to really change it at system scale is that actually governments do that? Because I mean, we can ask a lot as individuals and educated individuals in the West and so on, like to reduce, to take less flights, but I still see that this is not happening on a large scale. It might happen on a very, and it doesn't mean that people shouldn't do it actually, but also like to put all the focus and all the pressure, let's say, on individuals. I don't think can bring about the change that would have with government, although it's very unpopular. I agree, it's very tricky, but like, yeah.
Thank you for the question. You can take as an example the COVID pandemic, right? So to me, it was a big surprise to see the way the government acted in the COVID pandemic, because when I tried to advocate for this stuff like a few years ago, it was like, I can drop the match and it's not going to make any difference going around and talking about this. It's just useless. Instead, COVID demonstrated that the government can act if they want, but they act only if a vast majority of people will agree.
Yeah.
So they will, I mean, that's the big issue. And still, even there it generated sort of polarization of people, those saying, no, the government is wrong or whatever, right? So even now there is a debate if COVID policy taken a few years back were right or wrong. That's a problem, of course. So the big issue is simply that if the government has a role of balancing the system. If the system want to go to the very collapse of the economy, the government should basically wait the system to collapse, so that people at that point are aware, look, that what's happened, and then you can take the proper policy being agreeable by everybody else. I don't know if that makes sense. It's a very complicated thing to try to look at. So my point there was that if you change consumption pattern, you will help a little. Clearly, it's not the only way. The government will help. So it's, let's say, chicken and the egg problem. And the government should follow. They always say the government is not a leader, is a follower, right? They try to listen and try to accommodate the needs of the businesses or the needs of the people. Normally, they're clear. The main objective is normally to manage inflation and manage employment. I think these are the two major variables to try to control. When you hear, central bankers, when you hear, taxes and things, you always want the economy to operate, because that helps inequality decrease. That help let's say, helps inequality decrease in a pacific way. Okay, because if that doesn't work that way, at some point the inequality will be so much, then there's going to be a serious riot. In history, you had the French Revolution, for example. Again, I think the government kind of know about that, and that's the thing they will never allow. But still, we live in a democratic world where the voices of many matter, which has the advantage that everybody can say something, but the drawback that if you say something right, you will become a bit lost in the communication potentially, or in the opinion of many other people. So I don't know if that's kind of capture what I'm trying to say. Again, there is not really an answer. Is a way to realize we are a little bit in the complex problem that we have to find some way to deal with. Thank you.
I guess that may be a last point in this area of questions. There is a very interesting discussion in the chat. So there is a comment from Georgia that most of the people don't have the willingness to change behaviors. And there is a half question from Claudia that, well, people do if it leads to the desired outcome. So people miss smart goals. So what exactly must we do? What is my target? How do I measure? How do I know if I reached my target? Step by step. That's kind of a comment. Maybe you can comment on that as well. What could be the smart targets for us, in our individual lives, but also in general in society?
I mean, the smart targets. There isn't really a absolute answer to that, because the more you generalize, the more you make it wrong very often. So you want to be personalized to the specific needs of every single person and every single needs. So, I mean, there's a lot of thinking you can make around what would be valuable for one person's life, for example, right? So does what they do have meaning? Am I creating jobs just for the sake of creating jobs? Do people are feeling happy in the life they take forward? Do I really need to have a lot of things that I use all the time? So maybe a simple way is to start being disciplined about what we do, try to monitor it ourselves, maybe have a kind of a table, try to demonstrate how much you want to consume into 1 week to demonstrate the required impact. So maybe my help having some sort of research on how much we have to consume as individuals to stay in the limit of the planet. My understanding is that, if you start comparing countries, you find that You know, if you are in the UK or US or Australia, you need 5 years, 13. I think Australia was 13 a few years back. You know, which basically means that people tend to. There is a questions about how people measure these things, but there is also a question about how we can live with less. And again, I think the talk of Manfela was pretty relevant on this because she was covering a bit more. The majority of people are the poor, right? And they are the one producing less and consuming less. So how do we balance that out a little? Maybe it's just sensitizing with each other against each other. Maybe just talking to each other. Maybe having a mate from the other part of the world in a poor country, creating a sort of social network controlled by the government, which helps a wealthy person to talk to a not wealthy person. Again, they would become all strange policies in the sense that they would they'd be questionable, and again, you cannot really, define with clarity what are the measures you can take forward. Simple, eat less meats, take less flights, and transport. Try to be close to where you work and things like that.
We have a bunch of questions about the model itself, so we can switch to talk.
Very
Let's
good.
start with a deceptively simple question from Aaron. Will there also be a population collapse in your model?
Fantastic, thank you very much. So the model I was talking about is available online. So if you look for Roberto Pasqualino Angular Raskin, you get an entire model, you can download it and play with that. And you also have all the scenarios and tests to those scenarios. One of the tests was about population and was trying to demonstrate how the model behaves if you decrease population or increase population or you make it more exponential. So the scenario you saw are scenarios where the population is the one of the United Nations till 2100. So you can definitely test what happens when you decrease population. The way the model works is a bit rough on that type of dynamic because it still doesn't distinguish on the inequality level, the wealthy and not wealthy. So again, the one thing that the Health for All did was trying to do that, so distinguish between those who earn money and those that have not really much money, and generate a sort of inequality. So depending how the population of one part of the economy will change, that will demonstrate how the system can behave. In my case, I've removed explicitly the dynamics of population that were in the World3. So as I said at the very beginning, the dynamics of World3 population were very questionable in the sense that it was much harder to try to make the model to calibrate the data, as well as questionable in the sense of, is that thing really true for everybody in the world? So I didn't feel like getting so much in that type of debate. So that's why I kept population growth exogenous to the system. But again, you can easily test that by changing the curve of population, and you have 3 scenarios, for example, and one of the scenarios in the testing documentation, which is as well online, is about 250 pages, shows one of the dynamics with population growth change. So the growth of population that will generate some sort of impact on a number of variables.
Thank you. So the next question is, well, that's my favorite one because we work on this topic actually. Question from Tracy: is there consistency, interoperability, or compatibility between the work that you are doing, and well, specific agent-based modeling framework, transit framework from Center for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity? So they do have their own agent-based modeling framework, but I would also expand it to, well, broader question of whether there is some kind of compatibility with agent-based models that do it in a different way, in a bottom-up way.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tracy. So again, in CASP, there is a lot of work. I know them pretty well. putting models together is always a matter of taking the time to do that. I know how they work a little bit. I mean, until 2019, I was more close to them. I'm sure they've done much more on this, so I'm not really updated exactly on that. What I can tell is that the way this model work can be used to disaggregate things much more. So I know they like input-output tables that are basically one of the best way to model networks in an economy, and they are some of the best ways in which data can be framed in the context of economic systems, in particular the input, output, and connection between different countries, so how trade of energy can be spread in different countries. So that actually gives a much more disaggregated version of everything I said here. And I'm sure in their model as well, you can test the same scenarios. You can start saying what happens if energy is less, and they will trigger some sort of feedback into the entire economy. So this model and their model was never tried to put, nobody tried ever to put them together, simply because my model was very large. And again, every single variable you add in the model can generate some sort of constraint to integrate that with another model. There were further work built up on this model, which was the regionalization, as I said, and that was also to put that into an input-output table framework. So basically this model now, there exists a version which is a interregional model, is in the world input-output tables, including energy as well, and connecting our system. So you get a closed system, not just a closed economy, high level, but you have a closed economy network level. And again, the uncertainty around whatever scenario you can run with that is very, very high, because the more disaggregates, the more the uncertainty increases. And you can also test a number of scenarios with energy resources on the particular area of the world you're more interested in, and see what happened to the rest of the economy, or whatever happened to other part of the system. Still, the more you disaggregate, the more things become complicated and large, and harder to interpret sometimes. So sometimes new feedback can emerge and can generate more and more difficult to interpret information, or on the other hand, they can generate more insightful information. And to analyze if these are true or less true, you just also need to spend time on that. And most important, to put the expertise that is not just a modeling expertise, but also the expertise of the detective looking at one particular area of the world and getting the insights of what actually happened in that particular place on the earth, such that you can say something meaningful.
Thank you. So next question, which is kind of similar also from Kelsey, is that has any work been done or is in progress comparing or contrasting what you're working on now with National Energy Agency's scenario patterns?
So the answer,
scenarios, yes.
I mean, the answer to this is not really, in the sense that was a part of the. It was interesting, let's say, to do that as a next step out of the publication of the book. So in the sense that was, of course, you want to update that every time a new report comes available. But not further work was done on that. Still, the model we have here can also be updated by anyone. Again, as I said, is online available. If people have questions and they want to do that, I'm very happy to support.
Given the reappearance, so that's a question from Frederick. Given the reappearance of high-stakes barter, such as, for example, China paying for Russian oil in cars and other manufacturing, did you account for this in the model, or can you account for this in the model? Probably you didn't. Is it doable?
Again, it's the typical thing. It's very doable in the moment which one has the time to focus on that particular question. So that question will require to start explicitly taking the different countries and then starting split in the transportation sector against other part of the economy. So I built other models, so not this one, with other colleagues that was built on the was focused on the transportation sector. We are trying to publish a paper on that. We will let you know when that thing comes, Frederick. And that was focused on Europe as well, and then trying to put at the side China and the US and India. So that the objective was to trying to demonstrate how foreign policy in a country can impact the other countries on the transportation sector specifically. And that would definitely focus more the modeling effort or the analysis in that particular area. So this model is not built for that, so it was very high level, super generic. And I suggest to use another model as the one potentially I built, or other models to look at that specific question.
So a quick follow on to that kind of thing. So I think from my understanding of the model, I haven't looked at the papers, I'm afraid. But it would struggle to model like extreme events like the financial crash, or things like COVID pandemic or Russian invasion of Ukraine. These kind of big, kind of one-off impacts on the system. Does the lack of including those in the model significantly impacts the predictions? Obviously, you can see with your oil price or fossil fuel price, whatever it was, plot that you missed a lot of that curve because you're missing the prices. Is it that actually once you look on a long time scale, they don't matter so much? Or is that a significant issue with modeling? You're missing these big events and that damages the.
So of course that impacts, okay, but impacts to the point of another research question, right? So that if you just look at the perspective of it's going to be an energy crisis, what might happen in the economy, based on relatively simple principles. So this one are assumed to be agents which just trade among each other, are connected, and they cannot really unlock each other from doing what they do. So they have to do that. That could be the behavior, okay? Of course, there are different dynamics taking place, and the more you investigate, the more you discover them, and you uncover these sort of aspects as well. So the financial crisis, again, is very complicated, very complex phenomena, and that requires to look at things like the housing market. There are potentially, I don't know, many theories behind what happened there at the very front. There are people who say China owns the debt of the US. As a result, the moment in which the US start collapsing, they cannot return the debt, and they create a crash in the US. That cascades to everybody. Other are just the housing prices. Other can put more. Others will tell you it's a matter of the perception of people being afraid of investing in the time in which they're uncertain. We are now heading towards a new financial crisis, right? And I don't know how that's going to play out. Jörg Anders has a theory about that. In general, I mean, it is hard to say just because the reality is not modeled, right? So it's people taking decisions, and this thing doesn't really model the decisions of things that might change over time. So it still assumes that everything is based on the same principles, okay? So people will keep using energy. If they do, and they are silly, let's say, that's what might happen. In reality, you might get a sort of population somewhere around the world taking a different role in defining the structure of their economy in a different way. So maybe this model doesn't fit well to Costa Rica, where today and tomorrow they are doing a conference with the Club of Rome as well, because they are not using the sort of fossil fuel, and I think they stopped doing a lot of policies that are not really in line with this type of model. So this thing assumes that the economy works in a very basic way without accounting for a lot of complexity that would emerge from network effects or cascading effects of individual level. And for that thing, you might need different type of models as well. In general, the model is valid until you test very simple hypothesis, which is again the same of limits of growth. So the limits of growth was based on this very basic hypothesis. You have reinforcing loop, exponential growth, and limits. As far as the exponential growth is still there, the model is technically valid. You can shift the limits a little, but the model is still there. So this one is also true until you assume that the economy will always operate based on a financial sector sitting on top of an energy sector and the natural resources. And that might really work this way. Again, the model is built not just to sit on its own, but it's built to keep expanding that. So a lot of structure were added there, the stock and flow consistency. You can easily add that sector and put it somewhere else and make more of that. So I suggest people to do that, even though I understand it's quite a complicated object. And again, modeling the financial crisis better was always because the more you model, the more you feel like you should model. And the more you start expanding that, and more interesting stuff for predictive capabilities. On the other hand, at some point you realize you cannot predict really everything, and something new can come up. I did new models at some point with COVID, demonstrating how the up and down can go on and on and on. Again, it's very hard to take this model and fit to the data unless you start building a model which starts from the fitting data approach. And again, the more you want to add potential or power for answering questions, the more the model boundary should be expanded with that new structure. But the simple issue is that every model should be bounded at some point, because if not, it becomes useless to answer any question at all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Just to continue on that, you can make small comments. There is actually a great discussion offline stemming from a similar question. Was biodiversity was considered in the model? People discuss population which starts this week, and this is really important. I think really important topic, but the model can capture all the topics. But can you comment on the basically whether it's possible to add biodiversity here? Loss or this is better to some other model.
So the biodiversity aspect is something that can be added in any model, in the sense that when you start modeling something, is always from focusing on the real purpose, adding the right variables, and expanding further on that. On the context of modeling biodiversity, that thing wasn't taken forward in this particular model. And the reason why is that it's very, very complex, and you can very often summarize that with sometimes simple curves, such like what they did in the climate change scenario was there is a curve increasing the impact on food production. That was a very simple way, economic way of doing this. To expand that curve into something that is more biodiversity related would require, I would say, a completely new model. Just to let you know, there is also a model from Jorgen Randers, and that was an idea that we wanted to integrate, in fact, the two models together. Yeah, I mean, there is a model, he published that in 2016. It was about modeling the biodiversity loss. He did that with Rockstrom. That model is also available online, and the idea was to let's put them together. So he did model the ocean factor. We modeled the loss of actually animals and species. We model things like climates, how the carbon get the full carbon cycle, soil. So again, that thing would be an entire new structure which you can plug into any other model. So not just this particular one that we present here, but literally any other model. Again, the main issue is the following: that when you try to connect two models together, that's the thing we call soft link, in the sense that either you connect to by closing the feedback and start generating a sort of complex dynamics. But to do that, you normally need the brain of both people building the two models. Or what you normally do is to extract from one of the models a curve, which you think matters, and give it as input to the next model. And that will generate some sort of impact coming from that. For example, I can go to the IPCC and build a better, removing my climate module and take some sort of curve taken from another IPCC model and plug into my model, and maybe I have even a better behavior. I think the interesting part comes when you start having reinforcing loops inside of a model, but then you need to have serious control on them.
Thank you. Now we'll go back to, I guess, what we can do with all of that, with the findings of the model, and maybe some recommendations, I guess. But to the question from Tobias about the role of interest rates. So when we think of exponential growth and how companies are pursuing ever-increasing market share and growth, it is fair to say that the fact that the financial system is based on compound interest rates, which creates high pressure for companies to grow their business. So if the financial system in theory would change globally from compound interest rate to linear interest rate, do you think this would address this problem? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I mean, the interest rates is a complicated variable to model. In this model, the way interest rate works is that they try to use that as the main balancing force to try and control the growth rates of everything. Because in practice, if in this model you cut the interest rates dynamics, you will start having inflation going up exponentially, most likely. Instead, because there is a feedback, so inflation gets as input to interest rates. Interest rates goes as input to all the investment functions in every single sector of the economy, and so there is an increasing cost of capital. And also, I think there is an interest factor linked back to the debt, so that basically the bank will have to control that the interest rate don't go too high in comparison to that. Then you have this balancing force, which will somehow keep the system in balance to grow in a certain rate. Now, making the interest rates linear, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what the meaning of linear against, for example, non-linear, in the sense that as far as the role of interest rates fulfills this purpose of balancing the economy, if it is linear or non-linear, probably doesn't really matter as much. This might generate some sort of interesting conversation, most likely in the financial sector. It is quite complicated to distinguish, most likely. It must be an important policy question at this point. And so I understand this might come from completely different type of knowledge than what I have. But from the perspective of the system, as far as linear and nonlinear interest rates will fulfill their role, that might not change as much the dynamic of the system. Again, the interest rates are a very important topic just because the interest rates represent the risk of returning the service capital, right? So if there is a risk that one person cannot really return the cash back to whoever the bank or whoever was lending that cash, we'll have an increase of interest rate, and that will generate a contract from this person to return much more than what they initially got borrowed from basically the lenders. And again, this interest rate is one of the reasons why we get exponential growth, and that's also why there is so much focus on debts when you look at the capitalistic economy, because that's where the money starts flowing. So interest rates would definitely generate a sort of control on the way the economy grows. I'm not sure if I have another way to remove interest rate out of the equation to build a better way of building the economy, unless you stop the debt economy at all.
That will be one kind of policy change. Okay, so many people are conscious of their consumption behavior, but that being said, we know that companies often push their pollution responsibility to our government. So the question is, what can we do with those multinationals that basically pollute and push this specifically on consumers?
I mean, the thing is that if you start building a sustainable system, right, it's quite simple to start building a system which makes sense. But still, because of the way the economy builds up on itself, things evolve. The way it really works is that the firms do what they do, and there's going to be somebody like us or researchers or trying to build up the evidence, build up the case to demonstrate something goes wrong, and then creating a sort of adjusting measure to stop that behavior to happen. And that's how it's always been. I believe the main problem is that while those creating the problem can act fast, those that try to solve the problem act much slower. You know, it's basically a sort of long process of academic. Imagine an international law case, how much time it can take to take place, or a law. You know, you can have the evidence to build a law, but it may take 10 years to have that done properly in this sort of democratic world. So again, it's quite simple to say multinational corporations should stop having this sort of behavior. There should be something, maybe the utilization of the digital economy that allows, I don't know, a particular item to be tracked all over the place, such that you know where it was transferred to the hand of one person to the next. And that's a matter of international law. So again, the core of everything is that at some point, Europe, for example, said they don't want to use glass for bottles, but let's use plastic. And that was a law, was put forward by the European Parliament, I don't know how many years ago. That was the origin of the problem. So again, you either stop the problem at the very source with a law that bans something. So that probably would be the easiest way to stop this sort of thing to happen. Or you start looking at the very complex dynamics that you can't really control, that it takes so much time to control, that it would be so much money or so much time to spend on doing something that at the end you could stop at the very beginning. And that's again one of the main reasons why limits of growth makes sense, because they were like, that's a problem, let's stop it at the very beginning. Still, the interesting thing is that the limits to grow also doesn't make sense. Why? Because while the economy taking this sort of funny behavior create problems, it also creates the job to try to solve the problems. As a result, it will fulfill the purpose of a government-based economy, where their objective is to have more employed people trying to fix the problem they are creating as well. I don't know if this makes sense.
So we have, I guess, the final question, and it's a big one.
Okay.
Well, do you see a global, that's a question from Aaron again. So do you see global collapse in this century, like limits to growth, it's saying? So I will maybe rephrase it in existential terms. So, is there hope for humanity? What are thoughts on that based on your observations and your findings?
Oh my, I mean, it's hard to say in the sense that there are institutions in this world that cannot collapse by structure, such as a central bank. No, a central bank cannot fail because they create money when they need to, and they keep the system moving. And from there, you have a cascade. So they are the top of the hierarchy, and we try to make the economy to operate. So again, defining collapse is a broad concept. There is an organization based in Sweden called the Global Challenges Foundation. They, interestingly, if people are not do not know about that, they listed the 8 reasons why the extinction of humanity can take place in the next, I don't know, 100 years or whatever, and they chose 8. Some of them are uncontrollable, such as the Earth being absorbed into a black hole. What do you do? But some of them are like the nuclear war. Some of them are like biological weapons. Or one, for example, was the pandemic, or AI taking control of humanity, and So there are people studying this stuff. Still, being aware of the problem, we can take the measures, trying to control them and trying to reduce the negative effects of things. So again, the economy is built up such that the problem it creates can be somehow dealt with other part of the economy. So when you wash with one hand, maybe make something dirty with your hand, you wash with the other, and keep doing this over and over. So the collapse of the economy, I mean, again, it depends what you collapse, because if you collapse the way we used to run the economy 50 years ago, maybe yes, but there is a transformation taking place in the middle. And that transformation requires not just changing way we operate things, but also how we behave. So, for example, you have the digitalization of everything around the world. That might generate a different way of building value. So, Meta is building a world, is a virtual world where people can jump in and make purchase in a world which is not real at all. So maybe is that the future of humanity? Do you call that a collapse of the economy? So again, we are transforming the society every year. So the next generation will probably will be born in a new world that we didn't know when I was born. Will fossil fuel exist forever? I'd say no. Will green growth save the world? It will have definitely a big role. Still, we have to understand how the material, the minerals that can support that will be supplied to this green tech growth. We will see how the geopolitics around green tech will take shape. Again, now we have all of these debates in Europe about there's an energy crisis, we have to go to green growth, but Europe doesn't have minerals to use. So they have to import them. As a result, make them dependent on the rest of the world importing minerals. Is that a collapse of Europe? Maybe no. Maybe they will manage to most likely get a deal with some other countries supplying those minerals, and that will potentially keep supporting the type of life we like in Europe, maybe. So again, try to get straight to your question. I don't see the very collapse of the global economy as the one depicted in the limits to grow. Still, we have to recognize that we are aware. I mean, we as society, we tend to be adaptive. We can perceive things differently. So if now you speak about Syria and there is a war there, is that a collapse? And I think, yes, it is. They kill each other. Is that a collapse for us? Maybe no. So maybe both the wars will keep taking place in part of the world, and the economy will work normally in other parts. That's likely. Again, the problem inequality is probably one of the biggest challenges, right, that we try to solve. Because what was the economy in the medieval time, a collapsed economy, where there was the very rich and a lot of very poor people, we were getting back there, so that's a fictional collapse as well. In practice, I would expect the economy not to collapse as a whole, not for the next 100 years at least.
This is very optimistic. I think that's a great end to our conversation today. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everybody from Zoom.
Yes, and well, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks time, yes, 19th of December, Jayati Ghosh. So she will close the seminar series for all of us. So 2 weeks time, I will send the email invite to everyone. So have a very good day, and
Thank you.
talk to you soon. Bye. Bye.